I moved into the building in late November, right when the air started to turn sharp enough to remind you that winter wasn't a suggestion anymore. The place was old, the kind with narrow hallways and radiators that clanked like they had opinions. My apartment was on the second floor. Cheap, small, but quiet enough that I could hear my own thoughts most nights. Which, honestly, was the problem. Most of my days looked the same. I worked freelance from my laptop at a small table by the window. Around noon, I'd walk 2 blocks to the little coffee shop on the corner, mostly just to see people exist for a while. There was a woman there who always sat by the window. Mid-40s, maybe a little older. Dark hair pulled back most days. Reading glasses she wore low on her nose when she worked on her laptop. She wasn't trying to be noticeable, which somehow made her more noticeable. The first time we actually spoke wasn't anything special. I had just picked up my coffee and realized there were no empty tables except the one across from her. I hesitated for a second. She noticed. "You can sit," she said, glancing up from her screen. "I don't bite." Her voice was calm, slightly amused. I sat down, a little too quickly. "Thanks." For a while we didn't talk. Just the quiet sounds of the shop, milk steaming, someone laughing near the counter. After a few minutes, she closed her laptop halfway and looked at my cup. "You always get the same thing?" she asked. I blinked. "Oh yeah? Americano." She nodded once like she had confirmed something. "I thought so." "You noticed that?" She shrugged, taking a sip from her mug. "You sit there almost every day," she said. "Same drink. Same seat." I didn't know what to say to that, so I folded the edge of my napkin between my fingers for a second, then let it go. "Guess I'm predictable." She smiled a little at that. Not big, just enough to show it had landed. After that we started talking sometimes. Not deep conversations. Mostly small things. The weather turning colder. The broken streetlight outside the shop. Once she asked what I did for work. "Design stuff," I said. "Logos. Websites. Freelance." "Yeah." She nodded slowly, like she was picturing it. "That sounds quiet." I laughed once under my breath. That's one way to put it. The truth was, most of my days passed without saying more than 10 words out loud. Sometimes at night, I'd type messages to friends I hadn't seen in months, then delete them before sending. Not for any dramatic reason. It just felt easier to leave things unsaid. The woman by the window didn't ask too many questions, which made talking to her easier somehow. One afternoon, I noticed her rubbing her hands together, blowing warm air into them. "Cold?" I asked. She glanced toward the door. "My heater's been acting strange," she said. "Works for a while, then stops." "Old building," I said. "Tell me about it." She packed up a few minutes later, sliding her laptop into her bag. When she stood, she hesitated like she was thinking about something. Then she looked at me again. "You live nearby?" she asked. 2 blocks. She studied me for a second, then smiled in that quiet way she had. "Well," she said, pulling on her coat, "if you ever feel like being a hero, my heater might need one." I laughed a little. I don't know anything about heaters. Neither do I. She pushed the door open, letting a gust of cold air roll through the shop. Then she glanced back over her shoulder. "Apartment 3B, she said. And that night, just as I was about to shut my laptop, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey, it's your freezing neighbor from the coffee shop." The heater just stopped again. I stared at the text for a full minute before replying. Not because I didn't want to help, just because it suddenly felt like a moment where the wrong decision could lead somewhere I hadn't planned on going. Still, my thumbs moved before my brain caught up. "I can come take a look." Her reply came almost immediately. "I promise I won't hold you responsible if the whole place explodes." I smiled at that, grabbed my hoodie, and stepped into the hallway. Apartment 3B was only 1 flight up, but the walk there felt strangely longer than it should have. The hallway smelled faintly like old carpet, and someone's cooking downstairs. When I knocked, she opened the door after a second. She looked different without the coffee shop window between us. Softer somehow. She was wearing a loose sweater, sleeves pushed halfway up her arms. "Hey, hero," she said with a small grin. I rubbed the back of my neck. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Her apartment was warmer than mine in the way lived-in places are. Books stacked on a side table. A blanket folded neatly over the couch. A lamp casting that yellow kind of light that makes everything look calmer. She pointed toward the wall near the window. The trader's over there. The heater was one of those old metal ones with a dial that looked older than both of us combined. I crouched beside it, turning the knob once. Nothing. You see, she said, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. Completely dead. I tapped the side of it once with my palm. Still nothing. Highly technical work I'm doing here, I muttered. She laughed quietly. That laugh was warmer than the apartment. After another minute, I found the small reset switch near the bottom. I pressed it. A few seconds passed. Then the heater groaned awake with a slow metallic rattle. We both looked down at it like we'd just witnessed a small miracle. Well, she said, look at that. I stood up, brushing my hands together. Hero status confirmed. She walked toward the kitchen. You deserve tea at least. I hesitated, then followed her. The kitchen light was softer. She moved around the counter easily, filling the kettle. You live alone? She asked. Yeah. By choice. I leaned against the doorway. I think it started that way. She nodded like she understood more than I'd said. When the kettle started humming, she spoke again. I used to live here with my husband, she said, almost casually. The sentence sat between us for a moment. Used to? I asked. Divorced, she said simply. No drama in her voice. Just fact. She handed me a mug and sat across from me at the small kitchen table. You're what, 24? She asked. 26. She raised her eyebrows slightly. That's a dangerous age. Dangerous. Old enough to think you understand people, she said, stirring her tea slowly. Young enough to still be surprised. I didn't know why, but my eyes flicked to her hands as she stirred the spoon. Long fingers. A faint silver ring she hadn't taken off yet. The room went quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable. Just aware. Finally she looked up. You know, she said softly. Most neighbors would have pretended they didn't see that text. Maybe, but you didn't. She reached across the table and lightly tapped my wrist with 2 fingers, almost like punctuation. Thanks for coming. It was such a small touch. Barely anything. But for some reason, when I walked back to my apartment later, the warmth from that heater wasn't the thing I kept thinking about. I kept thinking about how easily she had looked at me. Like I wasn't invisible for once. And I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The heater worked after that. At least that's what she texted me the next morning. Still alive. The heater too. I stared at the message while my coffee cooled beside my laptop. Then I typed back. Glad it didn't explode. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Tea later this week. I sat there for a second longer than necessary before answering. Yeah, sure. A few days passed before it actually happened. I knocked on her door around 7 that evening. The hallway was quiet except for the low hum of someone's TV through the walls. When she opened the door, she looked like she'd just gotten home. Hair slightly messy, sweater hanging off one shoulder, keys still in her hand. Oh, she said, surprised. You're punctual. You asked for tea. I did. She stepped aside to let me in. The heater was working now. The apartment had that soft warmth again. A lamp was on in the living room, casting light across the couch. You saved the place, she said as she walked toward the kitchen. I'm still grateful. You say that like I rebuilt the entire heating system. You pressed a button, she said. Don't undersell yourself. I leaned against the counter while she filled the kettle again. There was a comfortable quiet for a minute. Then she glanced at me. You work late a lot. Usually. Lonely. The word landed softly. I shrugged. Sometimes. She nodded slowly like that answer made sense. Before she could say anything else, a knock came at the door. She froze. Just slightly. You expecting someone? I asked. No. The knock came again. She walked to the door and opened it halfway. A teenage girl stood there, maybe 16 or 17, holding a phone. Mom, you left your charger at. The girl stopped mid-sentence when she noticed me standing in the kitchen. Her eyes moved between us. Oh, the woman, her mom, apparently, exhaled quietly. Lena, she said gently. This is my neighbor. The girl tilted her head slightly. The heater guy, she asked. I felt my ears warm. Something like that. Lena stepped inside long enough to drop the charger on the table. You didn't tell me you had company, she said to her mom, half teasing. Her mom gave a tight smile. I didn't know I would. The girl looked at me one more time. Curious, but not unfriendly. Then she shrugged and headed back toward the door. Night. The door closed behind her. The apartment felt different after that. Quieter. The woman stood near the kitchen counter, staring at the charger for a second before speaking. She lives across town with her dad most weeks, she said. Just drops by sometimes. I nodded. Neither of us said anything else for a moment. The kettle started to whistle softly. She turned it off, pouring hot water into 2 mugs. But when she handed me mine, her fingers brushed mine. And this time she didn't pull away immediately. We both noticed it. That tiny pause. Her eyes flicked up to mine. For a second, neither of us moved. The space between us suddenly felt smaller. Like if one of us leaned forward even a little. She cleared her throat and stepped back. Just enough distance. Too casual. Too careful. T, she said quietly. I nodded, pretending that moment hadn't just happened. But the rest of the night moved differently after that. Slower. More aware. And when I left, standing in the doorway with my hand on the knob, she looked at me like she wanted to say something. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Good night, she said instead. And somehow that unfinished sentence stayed with me longer than anything she could have said out loud. After the night Lena showed up, I told myself things would settle back into something normal. Neighbor normal. A quick hello in the hallway. Maybe the occasional coffee shop conversation. But that's not what happened. Instead, small routines started forming around us without either of us saying anything about them. Sometimes she'd text in the evening. Heater behaving today. Just an update for the technician. Or, T. And most nights I'd find myself upstairs in 3B, sitting across from her kitchen table while the kettle hummed in the background. We talked about ordinary things. Her work at a small architecture office. My clients who kept changing their minds about logos. Once she told me about the first apartment she ever lived in. Tiny place above a bakery, she said, staring into her mug. You could smell bread at 6 every morning. That sounds nice. It was, she said softly. Until life got complicated. She didn't explain the complicated part. I didn't ask. Some things felt better left half said. But the closeness between us kept growing in ways that were harder to ignore. Like the way she sometimes stood too close when passing behind my chair. Or how her eyes lingered a second longer than necessary when she laughed at something I said. Nothing obvious. Just small shifts. The kind you notice later when you're lying in bed, replaying the moment. One evening we ended up outside. The power had flickered in the building, and the apartment felt stuffy, so we walked down to the small park across the street. There was a bench near a dim street lamp. We sat there with paper cups of coffee from the corner shop. Cold air, quiet street, the distant sound of cars passing somewhere far away. She pulled her coat tighter around herself. You're quiet tonight, she said. Am I? More than usual. I rubbed my hands together slowly. There's just something I've been thinking about. She watched me carefully. That sounds dangerous. Maybe. The word sat there for a moment. Then I said it before I could stop myself. Your daughter looked at me like she already understood something. Her expression shifted. Not angry, just thoughtful. She's observant, she said. That's what I mean. She stared down at the pavement for a second. I didn't plan any of this, she said quietly. I know. Did you? The question caught me off guard. I didn't plan it either. A small breath left her. Relief maybe. Or something else. You know what the problem is, she said after a moment. What? She looked straight ahead instead of at me. You make quiet things feel less lonely. The honesty in her voice landed somewhere deep in my chest. I didn't know what to say, so I just said the first thing that came out. You do that too. The street lamp hummed softly above us. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she turned toward me, closer than before. Close enough that I could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes. Close enough that if I leaned forward, she studied my face like she was trying to memorize something. You should probably stop coming over so much, she said softly. The words didn't match the way she was looking at me. Do you want me to? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes dropped to my mouth for a split second, then back up again. And in the quiet space between us, it suddenly felt like the next thing either of us did might change everything. She inhaled slowly, then asked, almost to herself, Would that actually make this easier? The next day, I didn't text her. Not because I was trying to prove anything or create distance. I just didn't know what the right move was anymore. The night on the bench had left something hanging between us. Something too clear to ignore, but too complicated to step into. So I did what I always did when things got messy. I buried myself in work. My laptop stayed open most of the day. Logos, color palettes, emails. Small, quiet tasks that didn't require me to think about a woman sitting under a street lamp asking questions neither of us answered. Around noon, I walked to the coffee shop. The same one. Same Americano. Same window seat. Out of habit, my eyes flicked to the table she usually sat at. Empty. Which didn't mean anything. She didn't come every day. Still, I caught myself checking the door each time it opened. By the time I left, my coffee had gone cold again. 2 days passed. No texts. No accidental hallway encounters. The silence felt strange. Not heavy exactly. Just unfinished. On the third evening, I came home later than usual. The hallway lights flickered as I walked up the stairs. When I reached the second floor, I noticed something sitting outside her apartment door. A suitcase. Not a big one. Just a carry-on size. I slowed down as I walked past. The door to 3B was slightly open. I hesitated. Then her voice drifted out from inside. You don't have to worry about that. Another voice answered. Male. Older. I'm not worried, the man said. I'm asking. I stepped back quietly before they could see me. The hallway suddenly felt smaller. I went downstairs to my apartment without knocking. For the rest of the night, I kept telling myself it didn't matter. She had a life before I pressed a reset button on her heater. Of course she did. Still, my mind kept replaying the small details. The suitcase. The man's voice. The way she'd said you don't have to worry about that. The next morning I woke up to a text. Her name on my phone made my chest tighten a little. Hey, sorry I've been quiet. I stared at the message for a while before opening it. My ex came into town unexpectedly. Needed to talk about Lena and some things we've been putting off. That explained the voice. The suitcase. Everything. Another message appeared a moment later. I think I complicated things between us. I typed a reply. Deleted it. Typed another. You didn't. I hovered over send. But the truth was, I didn't know if that was actually true. The blinking cursor on my screen looked strangely impatient. Like it was waiting for me to decide what kind of person I was going to be. Upstairs, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Then a door closing. I opened the text again. Read it one more time. And instead of sending anything, I locked my phone and set it face down on the table. That evening, I walked past the coffee shop on my way home. Her usual window seat was empty. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. For 3 days, I avoided the hallway after 7. That was usually when her apartment lights turned on. I told myself it was accidental. Different schedule, more work, a few late grocery runs. But the truth was simpler than that. I didn't trust myself to knock on her door. The text she sent still sat unanswered on my phone. Every now and then I'd open it again, read the line. I think I complicated things between us. And then close it without typing anything back. Not because I was angry, just because I didn't know what the honest answer was. On the 4th evening, I came home earlier than usual. The hallway lights were already on, casting that dim yellow glow over the carpet. As I reached the second floor, I saw her. She was standing outside 3B with a small grocery bag in her hand, digging through her purse for her keys. She looked up when she heard my footsteps. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she gave a small, surprised smile. Hey. My brain scrambled for something normal to say. Hey. The quiet between us felt heavier than usual. Not uncomfortable exactly, just full of things we hadn't said. She finally found her keys and opened the door halfway. Then she paused. You want some tea? She asked softly. It was such a familiar question that my body almost answered automatically. But this time it felt different. More deliberate. I hesitated, then nodded. Okay. Her apartment looked the same. The same lamp in the living room. The same blanket folded over the couch. But the suitcase near the wall was gone. She noticed me noticing it. He left yesterday, she said simply. I nodded once. The kettle went on the stove. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence. She leaned against the counter while the water heated. I didn't know how to explain all that, she said after a moment. You don't have to. I think I do. Her eyes moved to the floor for a second. My ex and I, we're good at pretending we're finished with each other, she said. But sometimes life pulls us back into the same room. Because of Lena. Mostly. She looked up again. But that's not the complicated part. The kettle started its low hum. She didn't move to turn it off yet. The complicated part, she said quietly, is that somewhere between tea and broken heaters, I started looking forward to you showing up. The honesty in her voice made my chest tighten. I rubbed my palms together slowly. I looked forward to it too. The kettle whistled softly now. Neither of us moved right away. Then she stepped forward and turned it off. When she turned back around, she was standing a little closer than before. Not accidental. You stopped texting, she said. I didn't know what the right move was. There isn't one, she said gently. That's the problem. We stood there for a moment, the kitchen quiet again. Finally, I said the thing that had been circling my mind all week. You're not just someone who lives upstairs anymore. Her expression softened a little. I know, and I don't want to pretend you are. Another pause. The kind where something important is deciding whether it exists yet. She stepped forward once more and lightly touched my arm. Not dramatic, just real. Her hand stayed there for a second. Then she looked up at me and exhaled quietly. Okay, she said. And somehow that small word felt like both of us had just agreed to something we still didn't fully understand. Winter settled in fully after that. Not all at once. Just slowly enough that one morning you notice your breath in the air and realize the season has already changed. Life didn't suddenly become dramatic after that night in her kitchen. There were no big speeches, no grand decisions announced out loud. Instead, things shifted in small ways. The kind you only notice if you're paying attention. I started stopping by 3B again. Not every night. Not like before. Sometimes a week would pass where we only saw each other in the hallway. Morning, she'd say, locking her door. Morning. Just neighbors again. Except we both knew it wasn't only that anymore. Other nights, I'd get a simple message around 7. Tea. And I'd walk upstairs. The routine felt different now. More careful, but also more honest. We didn't pretend things weren't complicated. Lena came by sometimes. Usually on weekends. The first few visits were slightly awkward. The polite kind where everyone pretends they're not quietly observing each other. But she warmed up quickly. One evening, she sat at the kitchen table scrolling on her phone while her mom and I argued about whether the heater was actually making that rattling sound again. Relax, Lena said without looking up. He already saved the apartment once. Her mom rolled her eyes. I tried not to smile too much. Spring came early that year. The park across the street started filling up again. People walking dogs, kids riding bikes. One afternoon, we ended up back on the same bench under the street lamp. The one where everything almost changed. This time the air was warmer. The coffee cups in our hands weren't needed for warmth as much as habit. She glanced at me sideways. You know what's funny? What? You still get the same drink every day. Predictable, I said. Comforting, she corrected. For a minute we just watched people pass by on the sidewalk. Then she leaned back against the bench and exhaled. You never asked what happened with my ex after that visit. I figured if it mattered, you'd tell me. She nodded slowly. That's why I like talking to you. I glanced over. Because I don't ask questions. Because you don't rush the answers. The street lamp above us buzzed softly as it flickered on, even though the sun hadn't fully set yet. For a moment, I thought back to the first time we sat here. How close we had come to stepping over a line neither of us understood yet. Now the distance between us felt easier. Not smaller. Just natural. She reached over and lightly bumped my shoulder with hers. You know, she said, most people don't fix heaters and accidentally stay in someone's life. I didn't mean to. I'm glad you didn't mean to. The words were quiet, but they settled somewhere steady between us. Across the street, the coffee shop lights flicked on. Tomorrow morning, I'd probably still be there at the window around the same time. And there was a good chance she'd walk in a few minutes later. No dramatic entrance. No big moment. Just the small comfort of someone sitting down across from you. Some stories don't end with fireworks. Sometimes they end with two people learning how to stay. And if this one stayed with you too, tell me. What kind of quiet, real love stories would you want to hear next?